Howdy my totally tubular gamers, we're back with another video. Let's get to it. But it's not just another video, I got a ranking video for you. Today we're finally talking about SSX. Oh yeah. Now, if you're unfamiliar with SSX, or maybe you weren't around when this series was super popular, it stands for Snowboard Supercross. It is a series of snowboarding games, but it's not just, oh, a series of snowboarding games. No, it is the series of snowboarding games. If you ask anybody that's played even a handful of snowboarding games what the best snowboarding game of all time is, I am certain they're going to tell you an SSX game. There might be an outlier out there. Somebody might say 1080 or Steep because they're trying to be funny, but no series of winter sports games has received the critical acclaim and just love that SSX has. SSX is up there with the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series in terms of quality. It really is that great. So the SSX series are arcade style racing games where, yeah, you're primarily on a snowboard. They did introduce skis in one of the later games, but primarily you're on snowboards with larger than life courses, eccentric, exaggerated characters, and you're doing some pretty crazy tricks. I would say that there are two pillars to the entire SSX series: the actual racing side and performing tricks. Most of the time you're racing others down a usually large mountain, and along the way you're performing a bunch of tricks. When you perform tricks in SSX, you actually get speed boosts. They really reward you for just going absolutely nuts on your board and, you know, actually landing these tricks. People love this series for its sense of speed, crazy jumps and tricks, and just having a really fun, wacky vibe to it. This series was popular primarily in the 2000s when extreme sports games were all of the rage. And so all of these games just have a certain atmosphere to them that is rarely seen nowadays. So now that I've explained what this series is to you, I'm going to be ranking all of these games from worst to best. We're going to be stacking them all up against each other, comparing, contrasting, seeing which ones are worth playing, which ones are worth avoiding. I've got quite a bit to say about all of these games. Each one is getting its own little review here. So yeah, we might be here a while. With that, get the popcorn, get the Wendy's spicy nuggets, start up the car, get ready for your day, start going to bed, however you're going to listen to or watch this video. Take a trip down memory lane with me as we go over the entire SSX series. I'm going to be looking at all 6 home console games, from that original all the way up until the 2012 game. There were handheld ports for a few of these games, but I got no experience with them, so I can't really comment on that. But alright, this intro's gone on long enough. Let me know down below your favorite SSX game, whether you agree or disagree with the ranking, what you'd like to see me cover in the future. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. I got the Patreon and the super thanks. Any support is truly greatly appreciated. Seriously, thank you all so very much. You all make it worth it. And so with that, what's the weakest in the SSX series? So here we have SSX Blur, which I believe to be the weakest in the SSX series, releasing exclusively for the Wii in 2007. This is easily the most forgotten SSX game. I rarely ever hear anybody talk about this game, and if they do bring it up, it's usually not in a good light, but I wanted to give this game a fair shot, and after giving this game its fair shot, yeah, I completely understand why most people have forgotten that this game even exists or don't care for it. While I wouldn't say that this is a bad game, I wouldn't actually say that there's a bad SSX game overall, this one does get pretty close. So the game actually is a little odd to describe. It is essentially a hybrid between SSX 3 and SSX on Tour. There are 3 peaks in this game, each with a number of courses, and all of the courses are taken from 3 and on Tour. I'm pretty sure the game uses on Tour's physics. It certainly feels like it, and it goes about as nuts as on Tour does, at least when it comes to the physics and the tricks. When it comes to the characters, it seems to be a mix of SSX 3 and on Tour, and I don't really got much to complain about there. What I can complain about is really the lack of new tracks or courses. Pretty much everything is reused from the prior 2 games. I was really hoping we'd get a bunch of Wii exclusive slopes or something like that, but that really is not the case here. If you're somebody who's a diehard SSX fan, you've seen like all of these tracks before. And of course, while you can freely go down the mountain, there are a few events. There's races, the trick competitions. There actually is a new event, the slalom event. And so it's cool that there's at least something new here. Well, speaking of something new, we have the controls. This game has a completely different control method from literally any other SSX game. With it being on the Wii, you know it's using motion controls. And this is easily the most divisive part of the entire game. When people talk about why they don't like SSX Blur, they almost always instantly go to the controls. And it's not hard to see why. It just doesn't control all that well. Not only does it feel incredibly gimmicky, it takes a while to get used to, it feels rather imprecise, and doing the uber tricks is just completely whack. I wouldn't say that the controls are absolutely atrocious or some of the worst motion controls on the Wii, but doing the uber tricks is just kind of fucked. You have to draw out shapes with the Wii remote, and this is while you're doing other tricks and, you know, trying to race down the mountain. I just never got a good grasp on this. I'm trying to do like 3 things at once, and I'm out here trying to draw some fucking shape in order to do the uber trick and go fast. To put it simply, it's wildly unintuitive. The controls kind of just drag the entire game down. The controls single-handedly make this the worst SSX game of them all, but the issues don't end there. Something you've probably noticed is the game's art style and aesthetic. It is different from other SSX games, and while it's not terrible, I don't really care all that much for it. It kind of reminds me of the My Sims series, which will never be a flattering comparison. At least the frame rate though was pretty decent. What was easily the most disappointing thing for me about this game, more disappointing than the controls because I kind of expected them to be crap, was the music. This game only has one musician, Junkie XL. And while Junkie's not a terrible musician and the music isn't awful in this game, it is a huge letdown from what any of the other SSX games have. Like, all of the SSX games have amazing licensed soundtracks. This game though, yeah, it doesn't have that. What makes all of this even weirder and makes me question if this was always going to be the plan is that the radio station and DJ Atomica return, but then it's just the one musician. But to wrap things up, SSX Blur, it absolutely has some issues, but even with those issues, I still wouldn't say that this game is horrible. Like, at the end of the day, it still is SSX. The track design is pretty great, going off giant jumps and doing a bunch of tricks is always going to be fun. Outside of the uber tricks, that is. It's just I would rather play legit any other SSX game, and due to that, I would have a really hard time recommending this game. Even to the most die-hard of SSX fans, I'd say you should just go back to SSX 3 and on tour. I mean, this game is basically just that with shittier controls. But you know what? For being the worst game in the entire series, it's alright. And so here we have the one that started it all, SSX, releasing for the PS2 in 2000. It was actually a launch title for the PS2, and I'm sure there are going to be a number of people who are not happy with where this game is placed on the list, but hear me out for a second. I think the original SSX is a great game. It's aged incredibly well, and it's one of the best snowboarding games of the 2000s. But you also gotta remember what else it's up against on this list, and that's the entire rest of the series. This game really laid the blueprint, the foundation, the groundwork for the rest of the series to build off of. In my opinion, outside of Blur, things really have only gotten better and better. This is one of those good scenarios where I think one of the weakest games, if not the weakest game, is the original. The series has just gotten better and better as time has gone on, but that's not to discount the original SSX. This is still a pretty great snowboarding game. When this game came out, extreme sports games really were all over the place. Tony Hawk was super big, there was 1080 snowboarding, there was even Cool Boarders and Snowboard Kids, and while there had been snowboarding games before SSX, SSX really changed the game. Not to sound too reductive here, but they took a snowboarding game and threw some Tony Hawk Pro Skater pizzazz, spice sauce, whatever you want to call it, and just made a kick-ass, crazy arcade snowboarding game that would go on to influence an entire subgenre. And that impact can still be felt all these years later. If you boot up the original SSX in modern day, yes, like 25 years later, you can still immediately connect with the vibes and atmosphere that this game is going for. It was just going for a crazy, fun time. And while it doesn't get as wild or wacky as some of the later SSX games, I still very much like this game's aesthetic and tone. And graphically, I think it looks pretty decent. I think it looks good for when it actually launched. The game is like 25 years old, but I think it looks nice, even if the frame rate can be a little suspicious at times. But let's actually talk about the moment-to-moment gameplay of the original SSX. So it is an arcade-style snowboarding racing game that sees you usually racing down a large mountain. As you're racing down this track, you really want to try to get in first place, and the best way to do that is by doing tricks. Even though tricks will keep you in the air longer, when you land tricks, you actually get boost. The bigger the trick, the bigger the combo, the more tricks you do in the air, the more boost you get, and the faster you're gonna go. It really is as simple as that. You'll be going off these giant jumps, doing tons of tricks, there's rails to grind on, and you'll be boosting all over in order to win these races. There is another event type where it's a trick competition, and this one's even more simple than the races. You just want to try to do as many tricks as you possibly can to get the highest score, and sometimes simplicity really is king. And I say that because, man, this game is still just so much fun. Sure, it doesn't have the depth or complexity that plenty of other later SSX games have. It doesn't have tricky. The courses don't go wild. There's only 8 characters in the game, and the tricks don't go just completely out of control like the later games. But this game is still a whole lot of fun. It's easy to pick up and understand, but it becomes very hard to master. The controls definitely took me a minute to get used to, especially if you're coming back from later SSX games. It feels a little more unrefined and rough, but it's not bad by any means. Sooner or later, you'll have a great grasp of the controls and you'll be going off some giant jumps. And while at first it might seem like the tricks and physics are, kind of realistic to a snowboarding game, you'll very quickly realize that no. You'll quickly realize that the game very much goes for the Tony Hawk style of physics where it lets you just go nuts. There's nothing even close to realistic here. As somebody who's actually gone skiing and snowboarding, yeah, you're not gonna do anything close to this shit. Outside of the racing and the trick attack, there is actually a practice mode where you can just kind of free roam around these courses. That's kind of cool. I won't lie, there's not a ton of content to this game, especially when compared to later SSX games, but what's here is still a good amount of fun. And something that was established right here in this original game is that these games were going to have awesome soundtracks. This game has an excellent soundtrack. I really like the music to it, and it's certainly reminiscent of the times, and I mean that in the very best of ways. SSX is still a bunch of fun all these years later, and if you haven't tried it, I got no problem recommending it. If you like snowboarding games, and maybe you wanted to see where the best snowboarding series of all time got its start, check the game out. It's still pretty cheap all these years later, and I really don't ever expect that to change. Even though I would recommend several other SSX games over this one, I still think it's worth playing. And so here we have SSX On Tour, which released in 2005. Now, On Tour goes for a little bit of a different vibe and aesthetic to it compared to the other SSX games. While it still is on the energetic, lighthearted, fun side, it very much goes for a punk rock aesthetic. That kind of grungy, edgy, ripped skinny jeans mid-2000s vibes that many games had around this time. The aesthetic and vibe actually reminds me a lot of Tony Hawk Underground, especially with this game's general art style, but I feel like it doesn't pull it off as well as Underground 1 and 2. I still do like the aesthetic and tone of this game, but I very much can acknowledge that it is quite different from the other ones. It's funny, back when this game came out, people actually didn't like the change. They didn't like how different the overall aesthetic was from SSX Tricky and 3, but you know what? It allows On Tour to really stand out when compared to the rest of the SSX games, and even if it's not for everybody, it certainly does have an identity. So the comparisons to Thug don't stop there though. You actually get to create your own character in SSX On Tour, a first for the series, and I'll be real, I'm not huge on this. The create a character tools are pretty limited, and because the game has such a focus on your created character, it really feels like they pushed all of the other SSX characters that you know and love into the background. And honestly, I just don't really care for that. I like all of the wacky characters from the older SSX games. This game's got a pretty decent character roster, and if you're playing on GameCube, you can also play as Mario, Luigi, and Peach. And this really is as weird as it sounds. Looking back, this just looks like a fan-made mod. It looks kind of terrible. It looks like they took assets from like Mario Party 5 and just dumped them into this game, and it's kind of hilarious. So naturally, if you're gonna play this game at all, you should try to play the GameCube version, but I'm certain that's the most expensive version. So Create a Character was not the only new addition to On Tour. Something else that's new is that there's an actual story mode. But this story is as bare bones as it gets. You just compete in a bunch of events, you want to gain as much hype as you can, and you want to reach #1 on the SSX charts. There's nothing even close to complex about it, and the gameplay is as complex as it was in the prior games. You're all just racing down a mountain doing some crazy tricks, all in an effort to fill that boost bar and go as fast as possible. I will say, On Tour has a great sense of speed. This game goes faster than the previous games, and boy, you go really fast in this game, and it actually does feel kinda nice. The trick system is pretty good. It gets a little crazier than SSX 3, and the physics feel, I guess, a little more loose. I'm not entirely sure how to explain it. It feels a bit different from SSX 3, but it's not bad, not at all. In some cases, it actually feels even a bit more refined. You can do some really wild looking tricks in this game also, and it really feels just as great as it did in the prior games. Outside of the racing, trick events return as well, and you know, it really doesn't matter what SSX game you're playing, whenever you're trying to link together a bunch of crazy tricks and combos, it's always gonna be fun. And I think the track design is actually very well done in On Tour. Almost all of the courses feel different from each other, and it actually feels different from the prior SSX games as well. Another thing to bring up is that this game actually introduces skiing to the series. Yes, instead of a snowboard you can be on skis, but I'll be real, it controls basically exactly the same. But I think it's pretty cool that they included this. Another area where this game is different from the prior ones is actually with the color palette. This game goes for a very different color palette. I already brought up the vibe and aesthetics, so I won't get too into it. I'll just say it looks different from all the other SSX games, but I also like the whole sketchbook look to it, and I think this is a good looking game for 2005. Additionally, the music selection is actually pretty different from what the prior games had. Instead of going for a more electric and hip hop, it goes for that edgy 2000s vibe where it's all about rap, punk, and rock, and man, I love it. I love the soundtrack. This is the music I grew up with, and all these years later, man, I love the music to this game. It's so good. I know it's different from the other SSX games, but I can really appreciate it. So all in all, it seems like SSX Tour is a pretty great game, so you might be wondering why I don't have it higher. Well, I do have one other issue with the game. The structure of the game is quite different from the prior ones. Instead of choosing a character and doing a bunch of events as them, they really focus on the story mode, and I'll just be blunt about it. This story mode gets pretty repetitive. It's like 10 to 15 hours long, and it really is just event after event after event on the same courses over and over and over. And while it's fun for a good while, eventually, yeah, it does kind of start to get stale and you wish there were other characters to play as on these courses, but you're stuck to your crummy create a character. And I just wish we had a bit more variety to this story mode. Despite that though, I still think SSX on Tour is a great game. I have absolutely no problem recommending it. It still is a blast through and through, and I'm still listening to the music all these years later. I have absolutely no problem saying to go check it out if you're looking for a good snowboarding game from that era. Just try to check out that GameCube version. Seeing Luigi going nuts on the snowboard will never not be funny. And so here we have SSX, which released in 2012. This is the PS3 and 360 reboot of the series that is sadly the last SSX game to have been released. It's kind of weird to look back on this one's development. When it was initially revealed, it was actually titled SSX Deadly Descents, and it was a lot grittier and serious. It was a lot darker, and it felt more like Modern Warfare 2 than anything else. But as you can quickly see, the game we actually ended up getting is much more lighthearted and very much in line with the other SSX game's tone. But gee, wouldn't that have been weird if we got a dark, gritty, serious SSX game? Kinda makes you wonder. So this game actually does have a story to it. The World Tour mode sees a number of our favorite SSX characters getting together as they try to conquer the 9 deadliest descents across the entire world in order to raise funds by live streaming the entire thing. Makes me wonder why I wasn't live streaming my skiing adventures from a few weeks ago. The story, characters, world, tone, all of that is very much in line with the other SSX games. It's fun, it's not meant to be taken seriously, and it's just kind of a means to an end. It's there, so you get to go down some of the world's most deadly slopes. Unlike the other SSX games, this one actually uses real-world locations. I remember actually being really caught off guard by this and going, huh, yeah, I guess the other SSX games don't use real-world places in them at all. But not this game, it's all real-world stuff, and the courses are actually pretty different from the last few games. But when it actually comes down to the moment-to-moment gameplay, oh yeah, this is 100% SSX. When it comes to the controls, they actually offer 2 completely different control schemes. They have a more modern control scheme, question mark, and then they have the classic controls from the earlier games. I'm very much playing with the classic controls since I've been playing since the PS2 days, but I think the controls are still very well done. It's easier than ever to pick up and play this game, but it's harder than ever to master it as well. When it comes to the physics, it's pretty similar to Tour, and the game gets about as crazy as you would expect. It might be the craziest SSX game of them all, like actually. Those real world locations aren't affecting shit when it comes to those tricks that you're doing. Now when it comes to the trick system, it's pretty great in this game. There's actually a good amount of depth. Yeah, you can do some cool looking tricks here and there, but once you start chaining them together, oh, you go back into tricky mode. Yep, they brought tricky mode back from SSX tricky. Here you can do unlimited boosting and tricks. If you start doing a bunch of crazy tricks, like crazy tricks, you'll go from uber tricks to super uber tricks, really allowing you to have that super crazy delivery. Sorry, I don't know what came over me. Anyway, when it comes to doing these tricks, oh, it is just so much fun. Linking together all these giant combos, doing these insane tricks, and it just gets better and better. When you get good at this game, you feel so raw. I know it's going to sound corny as hell, but you feel unbelievably cool in this game when you start doing these massive combos. And then of course when you bail out and the whole thing goes out the window, you get all pissed off. But hey, not all is lost. This game actually has a rewind function. Yeah, it will mess with your score, but instead of crashing and losing everything, you'll just lose some of the points. You don't have unlimited rewinds though, and depending on the event, your rewinds might actually be rather limited. Speaking of events, what does this game have? Well, a majority of the game focuses on the story mode, where you're trying to conquer the 9 deadliest descents, and the events in this game are pretty similar to the prior SSX games. You're either racing one person down the mountain, you're racing several people down the mountain, you're trying to get the highest trick score, or it's some kind of exploration mode where you can just freely explore these courses and do little challenges here and there. But this game actually does introduce a new event type though. It's known as the Deadly Descent stage, where you have to try to make it down the Deadly Descent in one piece. That really is the goal, is just get to the end. Your rewinds are a lot more limited, and you can actually get really fucked up on these mountains, way more than any other SSX game. There's tons of dangerous objects. Forget just trees or the occasional large drop. We got avalanches, low oxygen, areas where you will legit freeze to death, and just total darkness. But you can equip some stuff to help you. These are known as gadgets. You can just straight up equip body armor to help you out with the harsh environments, a wingsuit to clear some really large gaps. You even get to equip pickaxes to help you in super icy areas. I actually think this is really cool, and it adds a whole nother layer to the game. I actually thought the Deadly Descents was a neat addition that I'd love to see come back in a future snowboarding game. It kind of adds a whole survival element to it, and some of these courses can actually be pretty tricky. And no, not tricky, I mean like actually can have some challenge to them. It can be difficult. This game can get rather difficult at times, and some environments can feel rather relentless, but like I already said, the game can be immensely satisfying. When you start doing well, the game will start to feel pretty great. Outside of the story mode, you can do single event, and then there was a bunch of multiplayer for this game, but sadly nowadays there's nothing really there for the multiplayer. At least when it came to the character roster, it was pretty decent. Some of the characters are locked off with DLC, which will never not be annoying, but at the very least all of them do feel different from each other. When it comes to the game's presentation, I think it's pretty good for 2012. I think this is a good looking game. The frame rate can be a little suspicious at times, but for the most part, it was pretty solid. And the soundtrack? Yeah, it's pretty good. I don't know if I would say it's as good as other SSX games, but I rather like the soundtrack to this game. They brought Run DMC's It's Tricky back, and whenever that song shows up, it's always, and I mean always, a good time. Overall, there's a whole lot to love with the last SSX game. While I know that there are a number of people that actually don't care much for this game, I'm not one of those people. I think the game is great. While I very much would love to see SSX return in the future, at the very least it went out on a high note. And so if you're looking for a kick-ass snowboarding game and what is easily, and I mean easily, the best snowboarding game of the entire 360 PS3 generation, look no further. You got SSX 2012. But please EA, for the love of God, don't let this be the last SSX game. It's been well over a decade at this point, and we really need a new one. And so here we have SSX Tricky releasing initially in 2001. Now, at this point, I think it's fair to say that we really have hit goated territory. It's pretty fair to say that SSX Tricky might be like the best snowboarding game of all time. The game came out only a year after the first, and it was originally intended to just be a remix of that original game, but they ended up adding enough to it that, they really considered it the second SSX. They really just built off the original in every possible way. Like the original, you choose a character and go through a number of events. The main mode here is World Circuit. And yeah, it really is just a series of events. There's two main categories, race and show off. It's pretty obvious what each event type is, especially at this point in the video. Race is, yeah, a race. You're trying to win said race. You know, come in first place, winner, winner, chicken dinner, that whole thing. And then show off is where you're trying to get as many points as possible. You want to try to chain together a bunch of tricks and get some high scores. Okay, so when it comes to the event types, it's really not any different from the original game at all. But where Tricky deviates from the original is in its core gameplay. It has a nicer feel than the original. It feels a bit more refined, it's easier to pick up, and it all around just feels more well tuned. But then we have the Uber moves, probably the most important new feature of the entire game. If you're able to fill your boost bar all the way to the maximum, meaning you're doing a bunch of tricks consecutively, then you'll be able to perform Uber moves, which involves characters actually just straight up getting off the board and doing these out of control, wild, over the top moves. And if you're actually able to land one of these moves, you'll be rewarded with infinite boost. And you can further top this off by doing even more Uber moves. And while all of this is going on, the song Tricky starts playing, and ooh, it really just all comes together. You start doing these crazy moves, you start hearing tricky, tricky, and you're just boosting like crazy, and oh, it feels really good. But there's even more depth to it. If the player can successfully perform 6 Uber moves and spell out tricky on the boost bar, you actually get rewarded with infinite boost for the rest of the race. So yeah, you really want to try to do those Uber moves, and this just adds so much more to the gameplay. It is that sauce you didn't even realize was missing from the original game. That's why it's so hard to go back to the original game. To not have the Uber moves and the unlimited boosting, it makes the original game feel like such a downgrade if you come back to it. But man, it feels so great and tricky. This gameplay is just immensely rewarding. The game totally plays off of risk versus reward. It's the same kind of feeling if you've ever played any of the pro skater games, where you'll just have these immense long combos that just go on seemingly forever, and you really tense up because you'll have a combo go for longer than like a full minute, and you're just like, holy shit, I don't want to crash, I don't want to bail out. And if you're able to actually spell tricky and pull it off, oh, it is crazy satisfying. There are very few other extreme sports games that feel this great and are this fun. It really all just comes together to create one of the most fun gameplay loops I've ever had in a racing game. Something else that really adds to this game is the track design. While some of them are remixed versions of tracks from the original game, there's plenty of new stuff here, and I think it's all really great. These are some of the best courses from the entire SSX franchise. And all of them really allow you to string together these just gigantic combos, and it really feels like these tracks were made with that in mind. They wanted you to go down immensely fast doing crazy trick after crazy trick, and it really feels like everything just starts to click by a certain point. At first you might be struggling a little bit, but once it starts coming together, oh, it really starts coming together, and you're not going to want to play anything else until you get really raw at this game. Now, something else that is worth mentioning is that they actually modified the AI in this game. Not only is it a little bit smarter, but it's also rather adaptive. If you're actively attacking the AI, they will also attack you back, but if you just kind of leave them be, they'll leave you be too. I think that's a nice touch. Outside of World Circuit, there's Freeride and Practice, and both of these are pretty similar. It just allows you to practice these courses or snowboarding in general, and then we have Single Event, which is just a single heat, but they actually do have time trials in this game as well. Like the previous game, there's a number of unlockables to get in this game. You get these by winning events with different characters. There's a number of different characters in this game. Almost everybody returns from the original. There's a few that don't, but there are some new characters here as well. I like all the characters. They're eccentric, memorable, likable, and kind of funny. Some of them get a bit wacky, and I mean that in the best of ways. When it comes to the presentation, yeah, it looks really similar to the original game. It looks a little better. The snow looks nice. The frame rate is pretty good, and I really got nothing to complain about. As for the soundtrack, oh, it's some good shit. Not only is Run DMC's It's Tricky song pretty excellent, but the rest of the music is pretty awesome in this game as well. The soundtrack, it really is a banger, and it just oozes 2000s charm. This game in general just oozes 2000s charm. I love the aesthetic, I love the visuals, the vibe is really fun, and it really feels like the game is just going for a good time above everything else. And you know what? It absolutely is a good time. It's not just a good time, it's a great time. SSX Tricky is genuinely one of the best extreme sports games ever, and I think everybody should go out of their way to try it at some point. Even if you hate snowboarding, you hate this style of game, really you just hate fun in general, I'd still recommend the game to you. It's that damn good. And then here we have it, the BAMF of all snowboarding games, SSX 3, releasing in 2003. I don't mean to sound hyperbolic here, but I really believe that SSX 3 is easily the best snowboarding game of all time and maybe the best extreme sports game ever. It rivals the best of the Tony Hawk series. This game is really that damn good. I'm sure some people are going to disagree with that. Plenty of people would say that Tricky is the best snowboarding game of all time, but I've always been in SSX 3's camp. I really love this game. The game really just builds off of everything that the prior two games had. It doesn't exponentially change the gameplay or anything like that. It just feels like the natural evolution from the prior two games. The biggest change from the previous SSX games is that the entire game is set on one mountain. In the previous two games, the courses were never connected at all. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but in SSX 3, it really is all connected. It's all on one mountain, and this doesn't mean that there's a lack of variety or only a few tracks. There's still a bunch of courses in this game, and they all feel different from each other. And as you play through the game, you unlock new zones, and you start getting higher and higher on this mountain. And what's really cool is there's actually a free roam mode where you can go from the very top of the mountain all the way down to the bottom in one single go. There won't be any load times, it's all connected, and I always thought this was really impressive. All these years later, I still think it's really impressive. Yeah, you can basically go through the entire game in one single go. I think that's pretty cool. And as for the track design itself, I think it's really great in this game. It's arguably the best in the entire series. All of these courses are set up in a way where you can go just absolutely nuts on them. There's tons of giant jumps, you'll be doing lots of tricks, you'll be going really fast. I really love the courses in this game, and I think all of them being interconnected really just adds not only to the immersion of the experience, but it just adds to the overall gameplay and feel. When it comes to the actual controls, it feels basically the same as Tricky. It might feel a little better, but not by a noticeable amount, and I could really say the same for the physics. This game just feels and plays great, and like the previous game, Tricky, there is just an immense amount of depth when it comes to the trick system. You'll be doing uber tricks like crazy, and yeah, it doesn't go tricky when you start doing crazy well, but I think the trick system is just as good as the previous games. I feel like there might actually be a little bit more depth to it, as it really wants you to have some variety in your tricks. If you keep doing the same few tricks over and over, you'll quickly get less points, which was always the case in older games, but it just feels especially true here. You're going to want to be doing as many varied, off the wall, out of this world, ludicrous moves, and you'll be rewarded handsomely for it. You'll get a ton of boosts, and you'll really start to get some serious speed. You can go really fast in this game, and I think it's got a great sense of speed. It doesn't go as fast as on tour, but it still feels really nice. Overall, when it comes to the moment-to-moment gameplay for SSX 3, all I gotta say is it really is as close to perfection as it gets. I have nothing even close to complain about. I really didn't with Tricky either, but 3's is just a little bit better in my opinion. It all just really comes together to create one of the most satisfying, rewarding, fun gameplay loops that I've ever had in a video game, period. Sure, there have been other SSX games, but this is the one where everything really came together for me, and yeah, I just absolutely love it to death. When it comes to the events in this game, you already know what it's gonna be. Race and freestyle, and you know what? They're just as good as ever. I love racing in this game. The AI is way smarter. They can be mad aggressive if you're being aggressive. And then freestyle, yeah, it doesn't really get any better than this. There's some awesome courses here. You'll do some out of this world combos, and the game will expect you to actually get really good at this game if you want to try to beat some of those high scores. Like, you're going to be here practicing for a good while, but once you get really good at this game, oh, you feel unstoppable. You feel like a total badass. You feel so cool, and you're not going to want to play anything else. At least that's how it was for me. I just wanted to play this game for hours and hours and hours, doing these crazy chains and all these loony tricks. It was the exact same feeling when I finally got good at Pro Skater. Like, that was what I was focused on, and oh, it felt so good. Like, I don't really know how else to describe it. It just lets off some kind of dopamine in my brain that goes, yes, you like this. You really like this. And so naturally, yeah, I really like SSX 3's gameplay. I also like the general progression of the game, not only as you make your way up the mountain and the courses start getting more difficult, but they also throw challenges at you, and as you complete events and challenges, you actually get money, and you can customize your characters, of which there is a number of to choose from, and you can actually even upgrade them a bit. So not only do they look cooler, but they're just way more fun to play as. They'll be faster, they can jump higher, they can rotate faster, they can edge faster. Yes, that's really what it's called. The sense of progression is really great, and I like the challenges here because they add some much needed variety from the race and freestyle. It's fun to just free roam and do the challenges, genuinely. And then there's a bunch of different characters to choose from, and you can try to get to the top of the mountain as all of them. This game just has a really great single player. Like the other SSX games, it has a pretty kick-ass multiplayer, and this might sound crazy, but the game even went online back in the 2000s. Yeah, you could play online on your PS2. Man, that's awesome. But even without the online multiplayer, this game is still a total blast. When it comes to the presentation, it's a big step up from Tricky. The game looks considerably better. There's a lot more variety when it comes to the snow and the environments. The frame rate is really solid. The animation is great. It's just a good looking game, especially if you play it on modern day Xboxes where it's backwards compatible. Yeah, it's good looking. And then the music of SSX3 is just legendary. While it might not have Tricky in it, I love the music to this game. It might be my favorite soundtrack in the entire franchise. It's really great stuff. DJ Atomica is here with his awesome playlist, and it really just adds to the atmosphere. I love SSX3's atmosphere. It's all about just being fun and going down this big ass mountain. While Tricky has a great atmosphere and vibe to it as well, nothing hits like SSX3 in my opinion. This game's got the vibe, the mood, the tone, whatever you want to call it. I'm picking up what it's putting down. I'm smelling what it's cooking. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm eating the Wendy's spicy nuggets. This game is just hella fucking good, and I love it to pieces. I think I've made that very clear at this point, and I'm really mad that it took me this long to finally talk about the game. I absolutely recommend the game to everybody. If you can breathe air, you should try SSX3. The best way to play it is on modern Xbox systems through backwards compatibility, but it is on PS2, GameCube, and Xbox. Find some way to play this game. Snowboarding and extreme sports games really don't get any better than SSX3. It's not only one of the best games in its genre, it's just one of the best games ever made. It really is a shame that we haven't gotten another SSX game because we've seen how good this series can be. This game proves how good this series can be. I don't know why EA hasn't made another SSX, probably for the same reason they haven't made another Skate, but they're making another Skate. Hopefully in the future we can get another SSX. Shit, I'd even love a remake of this or Tricky. I really just want some more SSX. Please. But in the meantime, we're gonna have to settle for the classics. And so that's it for today's video. Hope you all enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun talking about SSX. Let me know your favorite one down below. Did you agree with my list, or do you think Tricky's the better game? Regardless of how you feel, if you made it to this part of the video, you should at least comment our secret code word. You'll get a heart from me, meaning you made it to the end of this video. That secret code word is actually going to be 2 words. It's going to be spicy nuggets, because man, I could really go for some Wendy's spicy nuggets right now. At some point, I gotta make a Wendy's menu ranking list, but spicy nuggets are gonna be at the fucking top. I'm rambling at this point. Hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay safe, y'all. Bye-bye.